Hello, my name's Jen Luna. Today I'll be talking about my story with my abuser, who's a biological family member. I grew up with a family that came and migrated to the United States. They are asylum migrants from El Salvador during the Civil War in El Salvador. A lot of us are survivors of sexual abuse. It just made my siblings and I very vulnerable to violence. And unfortunately, that was at the hands of our own biological uncle. My mother would talk to me about sexual violence, especially as a kid, and she did it in a way that made me unsafe within my body. She instilled fear, and that fear led to a disconnection between my body and me. And she said, never let anybody touch you there. And if they do touch you there, it's bad. It was a blanket statement. So it was like, anyone who touches me there it is a bad thing. She did warn me about my uncle. But by the time she told me that, I was already too old and he likes them young. The abuse started when I was 4. We would all stay in the same household. So it was two of my brothers, 2 of my cousins, and we were with my grandmother and my uncle. He did have access to all these kiddos who he molested. There were only pockets of moments where he had the opportunity to get me alone, and he wasn't singling me out. Like, unfortunately, this behavior transcended. It was to who he had access to. The first few moments of sexual incidents, it was in the car. What's very strange about my uncle is that it was molestation. The thing is, it's just very weird, the nature of it, because there was no ejaculation, there was no penetration, he was never nude, but I'm just this 4-year-old, this 5-year-old, this 6-year-old getting my bust banged, getting called sexy. He would massage my body, and unfortunately as a 4-year-old, bother my chest and poke at it and stuff. It was very strange. It was almost like, when I look back, he was collecting data. He was just observing what would happen. He would sexualize me and call me sexy and invade not the inside of my body, but everything on the outside. And it was just very gross and icky, and it's just very weird. It makes me question, what was the point of it? If there was no ejaculation, if no photos were ever being taken of me, if there was no penetration, what was the reason for the molestation? The thing that pops in my head is how victims, unfortunately, do become perpetrators themselves if they don't acknowledge what happened to them. And so I highly suspect that it was one of those things where in his weird, twisted head, he was trying to normalize something. Perhaps this happened to him. It was almost observing. He'd be in the car. I remember this. I think this is probably the first time, again, 4 years old. He would smoke and he would never offer it to me. And he'd just play music and he'd talk a lot. It was grooming now that I look back. And the things he would say is he would just emphasize these already sexualized notions of women. If you listen to rap, you're going to be more desired by men. When you have a boyfriend, he has to be all these masculine things. And if you as the girl have to be there to sexually please him, basically, is what he was alluding to. And it was just very, very strange. I was fondled with, talked to, driven around, and then went back home. That's a very weird sexual violence story. To this day, he says, oh, I'm not a pedophile. I'm not attracted to you. I wasn't attracted to you or your cousins or whatever, but he has bothered and, molested all these children and disrupted their psyche, because that's what it was. It was a disruption to my psyche that really impacted who I thought I was, my identity, how I lived my life, my behaviors. That led to substance use, that led to always needing a partner because that was my only source of love. My uncle was the nicest person to us out of all our family because our predominant supporters were these women who were working all the time and they were highly stressed. There wasn't a lot of time to soothe and comfort, to snuggle and just be happy in the presence of our mothers. And so there's this dude who is our uncle, and just being super nice and giving us compliments and saying how lovely we are and how beautiful we are and how we're so amazing, and loving on us publicly, giving us hugs, saying, oh my God, I'm so happy to see you. And then behind closed doors, it's this weird thing that's going a replication of something, When I was about 7, he would ask me to undress. I'd be under my grandma's roof. He would be like, oh, do you want to watch TV? And as a kid, I'm like, oh yeah, I'd love to watch TV and stay up a little bit and use your laptop or whatever. And again, it was the same thing. No penetration, no ejaculation, but this time my top would be on, and then just massages, but not digging in. I'll be descriptive. It was just body touching, and it was very like almost sexual, very strange. I was still of a sexual nature, obviously. It was almost like he was playing like the role of like my boyfriend or something, like snuggling and like, I don't know, like talking to me, like hanging out with me. My uncle to my grandmother was the golden child. My grandmother highly favored my uncle over my mom or my aunt, and she just let him get away with a lot. I actually don't like how I phrase that. He was able to manipulate my grandmother into into allowing more room for him to make mistakes, if that makes sense. Like, my grandmother wasn't like trying to side with anybody. My uncle has a really great way of manipulating her. He is her only son. He's like a father. He became a father at 16 years old. And my grandmother, I think, just felt bad for him. And, you know, he really exploited that and took advantage of that. There was nothing to tell, because I didn't know what was going on. Like, I thought this was just my uncle. I remember this one moment when I had stayed in bed with him, and my grandmother came in and she's like, I think it's better if she looked at me very concerned. She's like, I think it's better if you come sleep in my bed. And my uncle's like, no, she's fine here. And at the time I was like, no, yeah, I want to watch TV. But then I was really uncomfortable. That night specifically, this incident was different than the rest because of my discomfort, because I was getting older, I think. He would play Grand Theft Auto and there'd be all these like sexual images that would make me feel weird, like, because it's slightly pornographic. And as a kid, I don't know what's going on. And like, pushing the envelope a little bit more into what was happening. I never told anybody anything. It's not like he said, don't keep it a secret. He just made it seem so normal, weirdly at this age. It was only a few years ago that my cousin had said, he touches me inappropriately, and no one did anything. I don't know what happened. He manipulated everybody. He just basically turned it on a 5-year-old. Like, they didn't believe a 5-year-old, and this is an older cousin. So at this point, that 5-year-old cousin is now a 9-year-old cousin, and I'm 7 in bed with her abuser. I am trying to figure out also why there's a discrepancy there. As a mother, as a grandmother, as an aunt, how do you walk away and continue to live your life still connected with this person? It's very bizarre. The way my relationship with my uncle, my pedophilic uncle, shaped me as a girl, as a young growing girl, was I really rebelled against authority. Like, any notions of you're a woman so you can't do this was completely ignored. I did not, for whatever reason, listen to the fear advice, like, you can't do this because you're a girl, or you can't go here because you're a girl, or it's dangerous because you're a girl. I truly did not fear anything. It's almost like I kind of internalized my own uncle's personality, because he has this audacity about him and this lack of consequences and this lack of fear. And those moments where I spent time with him and he was talking to me, right, as a little girl, I made an impression, because sometimes to this day, my jokes, they remind me of the jokes he makes. Like, to describe him as a man, he's very scummy, like, thinks he's like an alpha male, to feel like he's the strongest or something. His humor, his audacity, I would say, was instilled in me, because as a young growing girl, there was nothing someone could say to scare me. Luckily, I had enough sense to not dive in too heavy into the darkness, but I definitely did have this budding, growing, big personality inside me that wasn't really appropriate for the age. And so I hate the word hypersexuality, because it tends to be like only women who say they were hypersexual. But like, were you hypersexual, or are you just a woman practicing sexuality in a way where it's like, now you're being labeled as, and it's because women can actually have sexuality without being shamed. But I will say, as a young girl, my only source of love, I had to outsource. So I had to have boyfriends and girlfriends, friends give me love. And, my validation, my comfort, nurturing, my socialization, it came in romantic relationships. Early on, there was never any sexual acts. As I got older, and naturally, as a young growing girl, became more curious and desiring those types of like practices within my sexuality, that evolved. And it was really bad for me at the time, because a young girl practicing her sexuality is not a respected young girl, and rather is actually seen as something other than a girl. So the way my relationship with my uncle affected me as a young girl is he basically made it seem that it was okay for me to be sexually active. I was never anybody, and like, and I thought I can do what men can do. Like, if you have a sexuality, I also have a sexuality. And if I'm getting told that it's wrong, actually, no, it's not, because why are my male counterparts not being scrutinized in the same degree? I was a pretty strong young girl. These just didn't affect me in the same way. And I was really desensitized to the socialization of it all, truly. It's a little bit weird that my relationship with my uncle affected me in that way, but, he wasn't alone in that, and who I was as a young girl. That I also had these strong female authority figures around me. Valid, they were harmful. There was being put down constantly, being critiqued constantly, not being able to live in peace, but they still modeled independence. My pedophilic uncle, he normalized me to be okay with sexuality in a perverse way, right? In a way that's like it functions to men. Okay, like, so not in a liberating way, but in a very non-liberating way. He basically normalized it to be, there's no better word for this, but if a man wants to do something with you, it's okay. Let it happen. So I started to figure out that my relationship with my uncle when I was younger was red flaggy, because as I got boyfriends who I hung out with and there was moments of like sensuality, the smell of the smell, it was triggering and it reminded me of my uncle. And I'm like, ew, why am I thinking of my uncle? Like, that's a red flag. And so I started to realize something happened. I wasn't fully aware of what happened. I was really paranoid that like maybe my virginity was taken or something like that. That wasn't the case. But I figured out by 16, my uncle had offered me. And so it was just a really weird moment where my eldest brother, me, and my uncle were being given a by this 30-year-old, and we're being allowed to smoke. In the moment of being where I completely, like, my memory, just like I was back in that moment, like the short breath, all the figures fell into piece, and it was like I finally saw him, like, he's not safe. He's looking at me sexually. Like, I am a sexual object in this man's presence. And that is strange because this man is my biological uncle. So that's when I noticed something was wrong. And given the chaos and all the other traumas kind of happening, because sexual abuse is only one of a lot of trauma that I've had to overcome. I got into therapy like a year later. I'm like, something happened with my uncle. I feel like I dealt with a lot of suicidal thoughts. There was a day where I was like, I can kill myself today, or I can choose to live. And I chose to live and went to therapy, and life unfolded, and it was amazing. And life has continued to be beautiful, but it was really, really hard. And I had to choose at 16, do I live or not? Because at school, at home, I'm unloved, and I'm beaten down, and I'm ridiculed. And there's nothing or no one affirming that I'm a worthy human being. That's when the lesson of everything you need comes within really took a hold. And in ways, I'm so lucky that happened at 16 years old, because then I aligned with these powerful, healing, transformative, important people that instilled nuggets of wisdom in me that have made me the person that I am today. So I live every day helping somebody. I have a Discord community where I chat with survivors. I do my TikTok lives. I do my sex support here. I'm currently doing research at UCLA about generational trauma and healing generational trauma. And I'm carrying over that research at Columbia in the fall. So there's many, many things in the works that I'm using to help abusers. This interview is obviously one of them. It's like little seeds being planted in the flowers. They're going to blossom, they're to come together. But I'm also on the National Sexual Assault Hotline. I mean, I'm an activist through and through. My whole life is having these discussions about overcoming deep-seated traumas and just like kind of, just giving light to places that are so, so dark. Because that was life. Life was pitch black. And if a 16-year-old can do it, anybody could do it. Every day we have to show up for ourselves in order to enhance our life and heal our wounds. I believe to this day that I have blocked out some things that happened between my uncle and I, but they come to me in moments of like dreams or nightmares, and I write them down and I take note of them. But because these memories are coming up post kind of being dependent on a toxic family, and in therapy, I handle those memories with grace and with strength, and it doesn't weigh too heavy. He did not take my virginity, but he did take my innocence. At 4 years old, I was a 4-year-old, and then suddenly I was object. Here's the thing. He would say, sexy. He would slap my butt. He'd be like, hey, sexy. Hey, beautiful. Like, those tight PJs are cute. Like, you look really sexy right now. Like I was sexualized at a very young age. And that's where the innocent takes place, because then all of a sudden I'm looking at my 9-year-old body like, why don't I have boobs? And like, oh, these boobs are dangerous. And like, you know, like my body was like weaponized in a way to myself. Like I couldn't be a child. When I was in community college, the few months before transferring to UCLA, there was this huge breakout where he put a hole through the door trying to physically fight me. He found out I had told people. I told my grandma. I told everybody. And till this day, I tell everybody, because I grew up luckily in an age where it's like, say his name, Me Too, all these political, you know, movements that have strengthened like my belief in myself and knowing that I'm going to be okay, truly. And yeah, I talked about it all the time. I was like, no, I'm not going to show up to Christmas, Grandma. I'm going to be in my room. Like, I'm not going to be around a pedophile. And I would use those words and they'd be like, okay, whatever. And so for 2 years, it carried on that way, where I would not be around my family for the holidays. I'd be there in the same household, but I'd be hidden away in a room because I'm not coming out, because I'm not going to spend time with an abuser, point blank. Hence the reason why I wasn't living with my mom and my father also, because the standards were just being raised. I was just really like strong in I'm not saying anybody that hurts me. And so it was April 2022. His now wife comes in and says, your mom just left me a voicemail, something about your uncle sexually like violating you. And I'm just like, oh my God. My mom, in retaliation to me saying you're not going to be in my life, left a voice with like essentially like ignited a bomb within my life, my grandma's life, aunt-in-law's life. It completely changed the trajectory of my life. To this day, my life has not been the same since my mom outed my story to my abuser. I remember she comes into the room. All I can say is, I'm so sorry. I love you so much. But it did happen. And I'm sorry you had to find out this way. And she's trying to get specifics. And I'm like, I just want you to know that I love you and I'm so sorry. Because them together, because she has a daughter that's 7 at this time. And of course, I already know my uncle is already there grooming, because I can see the signs. As I saw my cousin-in-law grow, I saw signs of how I acted, the maturity inappropriate to the age that the child is at. I hear him outside. He's in his car. He drives. I hear his car just like racing down the street. He parks in front of my grandma's house. He slams the door. He like marches into the house. And she just cussing, like, where is she? Where is she? Where is she? I can't believe I'm being accused of this again. And I'm just like, in my head, I'm like, what the f-? But he's like, where is she? Like, this is stupid. She's lying. She's ugly. She's gross. I lock the door immediately. I call the police. My grandmother does nothing. My great-grandfather, they can't do anything. There's just like, they're old. And what did they do? Stop him? He's just like breaking through the door. I have recordings to this day of me behind the door and him saying what he's saying. He's like, this hurts me more than it hurts you. Nothing has happened to me before. Like, you're disgusting. Come on out. Like, I'm gonna give you a reason to call the cops. Like, I'm gonna beat your ass. I'm gonna hit you. I'm gonna hurt you. When the cops come, he is just still harassing me while the cops are there. He's like, how can I be attracted to that thing? Look at her. I'm attracted to women. I'm not attracted to like gross, ugly girls. Like, she's just a sad girl. She's just a sad girl with like no life, no one friends, and no one loves her or whatever. I'm like, okay, dude. So he gets escorted. Like, he doesn't get escorted out. Unfortunately, his license says that this is his house, even though he doesn't live there. My grandmother doesn't tell the cops, hey, get him out of here. She's paralyzed and shocked, doesn't know what the hell to do. Like, her own trauma is being flashed before her eyes. And he leaves willingly, finally, and they look at me, and the police, they can't protect me. They aren't trained in this capacity, so all they can say is, like, you can go to the courthouse and file a restraining order. And I'm like, okay, at least I can get him for something. I'll file a restraining order on domestic violence or whatever this was. So I do that. When my blood aunt comes home, she sits me down. She's like, what happened? I start to cry, and she goes, don't cry. You don't need to cry. It's over now. Don't worry about it. I talk to her and I tell her about the restraining order and how I'm going to do it. She goes, if you file a restraining order, that is a slap to your grandmother's face and you cannot live here. And so then suddenly my entire room is packed in my grandmother's house. I'm in my car for a few days and I live at a shelter for a few months. And I wait until I start at UCLA. Yeah, I haven't spoken to my biological family since. Well, when my grandfather, so my aunt during the conversation, her essentially asking me to leave, she said, like, I can't stay here, but she didn't kick me out. I walked away. But she says, when my grandfather and uncle molested me, I didn't tell my grandma because I didn't want to break her heart. Like, this is breaking her heart. I don't want to break your grandma's heart. Really, that's why I'm doing the academic work and research. My whole project and like thesis is I'm trying to figure out what caused my family's wounding, like the generational wounding. What is keeping them in such close proximity to an abuser, to a pedophile, to their own, like my uncle is a mirror to their own abusers. You know, he models the same violence they had. So I'm trying to figure out, why is that?